This is where I want to lead you, JD, because you mentioned last segment the idea of Chris Paul starting. Chris Paul's never come off the bench. 1,214 games in the association, all starts. And that's incredibly rare among any player. Even all three of the core Warriors, they've all come off the bench a little bit. Clay only as a rookie,
right,
and not since.
Steph in playoff games.
Right, and and Draymond Green in playoff games too, which was a surprise to me that he would volunteer that, but it just shows how much he wants to win. I think it was the right choice. Chris Paul, can he be a bench player for the first time in his life? And more importantly to this conversation, can he be a good citizen on this new Golden State Warrior team?
That's a great call. I'm not worried about him being a good citizen. I think if Steph, Clay, and Draymond are on board with it, which I think you don't make the move unless they're on board with it,
right,
to me that's not a concern. I do think setting the tone for him coming off the bench is important, and we'll see how it all shakes out. I want him coming off the bench if I'm the Warriors, because if it's weird for him, or he still thinks he's a starter, or there's some kind of ego involved with I need to be with the other future Hall of Fame players, and like then that does set this on a path to where, not that he's going to be a malcontent about it, but it makes it, to use a term that Clay used, a little weird.
Yeah,
makes it a little weird. And Clay, I was out of context when Clay was just talking about the notion of Chris Paul being on the team. But as far as I look at it, like you need to establish your starting five, and then Chris Paul as first guy in, basically. And you figure it out from there, as opposed to now you're starting him, which means Looney's coming off the bench, and then you're starting smaller, and then Looney's coming in, but for who? It just, I don't know. I don't see how, and this is where Steve Kerr, it's up to him to figure out how to divvy the minutes, and it's probably too early to even have a conversation about it, but I just sort of assumed Chris Paul's coming off the bench. Like, he's going to be
the same assumption.
And I know it had kind of been floated, like, why wouldn't he start? Or he would, he's a future Hall of Famer or whatever. Like, to me, part of it's kind of like Andre Iguodala coming to the Warriors. And, Mark Jackson started him the first year, and then Steve Kerr comes over and goes to Iguodala and says, hey, man, you can be a great sixth man. You can be the glue to this whole unit. You're still going to play with the main guys. Like, to me, it's similar. Like, in terms of basketball IQ and what they're getting in Chris Paul, different positionally. But I think part of setting the harmonious tone and the organized tone to how next year has to play off is for him to be cool with it and for them to ask him to do it.
Right, or better yet, for him to volunteer to do it. I don't think you can start with CP3, Steph, and Clay.
And if he has a problem with it, then that's a problem.
That's a huge problem.
You got a problem already before you've even played a game.
You're listening to 95.7 The Game, KGMZ FM, and HD1 San Francisco, always live on Twitch, YouTube, and the free Odyssey app. It's Willard and Dibs. Willard off till Wednesday, JD in for the balance of the week. Free agency begins in 21 hours. The first piece for the Golden State Warriors is Jordan Poole traded for Chris Paul. Ryan Russillo joined us yesterday, and we asked him if Draymond and CP3, can they get along?
I think they'll see something in each other where they're gonna be excited about it. I really do. And look, Draymond, for whatever the bad version of it is that we've all experienced, and at times it can be a little tough. You're just like, okay, but he's still one of the smartest players in the league. He knows what he's supposed to be doing every time. He knows the assignments. He knows all that stuff. He's not going to make those mistakes. And, that's the stuff that Chris Paul gets frustrated with. He's going to a graduate course group of good basketball guys between Kerr and the main characters on this team, and that may be why Poole is somewhere else, because it just is, as much as the run was really impressive for him last year, the mistakes 2 seasons ago when they won it all, but last year the mistakes were just so maddening at times. So I don't really think that that's anything that I'd worry about where you're like, oh, they're going to clash because they both have these really chesty personalities. I think they're going to appreciate each other as competitors.
Ryan Russillo from the Ryan Russillo podcast and The Ringer yesterday here on Willard and Dibs, and I take him at his word. He is a big-time Chris Paul fan, and I like his description of he and Draymond both as, quote, chesty players, but the basketball IQ, and Chris Paul enters into this situation well aware of, it's been a successful group here. I mean, they've knocked him out how many different times throughout his career, And also at 38 years of age, he's got the awareness of where he is in his basketball career and how he can fit with this team.
Yeah, I think this is a real opportunity if Chris Paul wants to embrace it to make the final chapter of his career into something really productive and more productive, I think, than he was even this year or at the tail end of last year where things flamed out for the Suns in the 2022 playoffs and they got beat by Dallas and lost the 3-2 lead and all of that before the Mavs went on to lose to the Warriors. So I think accepting a lesser role, accepting that he's no longer a top 2 player on a championship contending team, but also understanding the fact that he really can complement a big 3 that is on the downturn as well and leave an imprint on some of the younger players who to this point the Warriors have not been able to get as much as I think they would have believed they would have. Like, make no mistake, I think the Warriors would have believed that Kuminga and Moody would have brought more to the table to this point in their first 2 years. I think, and we don't need to get into whose fault and all that.
Right.
But I think Kuminga and Moody would say, hey, we thought we'd be farther along. And I think the Warriors would have thought they would have been farther along to this point. So maybe Chris Paul can facilitate a turning of a corner with both of those players this year in a meaningful way. So he just has an opportunity, to just on so many different levels raise this team back to championship prominence and at the end of the day get that ring for the final box checked on what has been an incredible career
and get him off the list of best players never to have won a chip, because if you Google any source with that list, he's in the top 10 all time on all those lists, which speaks to a great career, but it also speaks to being stuck in Barkleyville, where Charles Barkley is constantly being harangued for being maybe the captain of that team. 888-957-9570. That's also the Comcast Business text line from the 925. Where are you getting this information about the Rooks being isolated? And he's asking me that. You guys are recklessly creating a narrative. I need to change that statement. I don't think that they're being isolated intentionally or otherwise. All I was trying to say, and you could speak to it better having been in the locker room, you now have a much smaller group of younger players. So when you go out on the road, and you've been on the road with these teams, and I've seen it myself up close, it tends to get cliquish. You don't have 15 guys all going to pizza together. Your veterans are going to hang out together. Kevon is out there helping old ladies cross the street, and Wiggins is keeping to himself. And you've got a group of young players who are naturally going to gravitate toward each other. And now you don't have that same group anymore. You've got a bunch of those guys no longer with the team. That's all I was saying in terms of the Rooks, the young players. You don't have that same group. So it's going to be incumbent on everyone to bring back that team vibe and, try to get everybody back on the same page.
And I think having fewer young players helps that. To me, having so many young players on the team to where they go off in their own clique, separated from the guys who have won the multiple championships, I think that's bad. I think that sets a bad tone, to be perfectly honest. So I kind of like the fact that, and look, you still have the 2 picks this year. You have Kuminga and Moody are still around, so they're still going to be a group, but I think it reinvigorates the older players to have to connect with the younger players because there are fewer younger players to go. It's kind of like the 7th grade dance, right? Where all the guys go to one end and all the girls go to the other end, right? Like, you don't want that. You want there to have to be a commingling. And so I think taking a few of the young players away helps that.
Yeah, it kind of forces the integration a little bit more. And, last year there were so many different problems with the chemistry. You can't just look at age as the number one reason, but you look at this team with a clear-cut veteran core, 4 guys 33 years of age and older. Chris Paul's 38. When he debuted in the league in 2005, Jonathan Kuminga was 4 years old, and Moses Moody was 4 or 5 years old, and he's been in the league that long. So there's going to be a certain disconnect when you've got a 38-year-old trying to gel and jibe with a 21-year-old, but Chris Paul will have a unique opportunity, being the leader of the second unit, most likely, to be able to play with these guys and coach them up on the floor. 888-957-9570. Patrick's next in Foster City. What's up, Patrick?
Hey, thanks for taking the call. And first of all, I love hearing John with you. You guys have been great this afternoon, so it's been really great.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a huge fan of JD's.
Yeah, a couple things. One, I think in terms of automatic improvement, I think having Wiggins back, and not AWOL, and I'm not saying that in a derogatory way, but that's kind of a freaky thing, and having Peyton for the whole season instead of, getting him and then finding out he can't play for most of the season. Those two things alone, just kind of by default, should make the Warriors a lot better than they were last year, plus chemistry. So I think they've got some sort of automatic built-in improvement, assuming the injuries are no different from last year. You're always going to have injuries, right? But I also think having, when have we had a pass-first point guard on the Warriors? Now that we have maybe one of the best ever. I mean, it's probably been 50, 60 years since we had Guy Rodgers, maybe, and no one really remembers Guy Rodgers. But I mean, that's how long it's been since we've had a pass-first point guard. So I think all of a sudden the shooting on the team, especially the second unit, has got to get better with a guy, dishing the ball like Chris Paul. And I also think that the outside shooting on the bigs, John mentioned, having a stretch four or whatever. I wouldn't call any of these guys a stretch four, but I would say they've got long reach and they can hit outside shots. And I'd put Wiggins in that camp. I'd put Thompson in that camp, and I'd put Moody in that camp. They're all good shooters and can all hit from outside, and they all are not necessarily tall, but they've got some big wingspans. And I love the rookies. I think that the two guys they got are just perfect for the Warriors. I don't know. It'll depend on how fast they develop, but I think this Trey Jackson guy, he may be a real steal because, first of all, he's 3 years older than Kuminga already. So in terms of maturity, he's 23. He's 6'9". I think he weighs 240, 250, something like that, with a 7'1" wingspan. He was first-team All-American. He led his team in scoring and rebounding, shots blocked, passing. He was all Big Ten defensive player. I think he led the Big Ten in blocks this year. And that was just a pretty strong conference, the Big Ten this year. So, I'm not counting on him to do all those things in the pros, but if they can kind of rein him in and get him just to play some defense, and he's a great jumper and he can run the court well, play defense and pass the ball, they don't need the scoring and the rest of it. So I think that could really develop. And finally, in terms of a guy they might get, and I think John may have mentioned his name earlier, but, a guy that could fit the role of just playing some interior defense might be Bismack Biyombo from Phoenix.
Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate the phone call, and we'll leave you with Bismack Biyombo. And he's definitely a guy who can come in and block a shot and grab a rebound, but I don't know if he fits offensively with what the Warriors would be trying to do.
No, probably not. But again, he's in that mold of big body, not going to play every game, but can provide a different element to the other two bigs on the roster. I appreciated Patrick's disbelief in that you were genuinely happy to have me here.